Throwaway account for obvious reasons. I've been sitting with this memory for years, and for some reason it's louder lately. Maybe it's age, maybe it's guilt finally stretching its legs. Either way, here it is. The jewelry store theft happened when I was 26, broke in the way that's more humiliating than desperate. I wasn't starving, I wasn't homeless. I was just drowning quietly, rent overdue, credit cards maxed, pride doing most of the damage. I'd convinced myself I was smarter than the situation, smarter than other people, smarter than the rules. That mindset is dangerous, by the way. It makes bad ideas feel inevitable. I'd been casing the same small downtown jewelry store for weeks on my lunch breaks, pretending to window shop. Family-owned place. The kind with faded velvet displays and a bell on the door that jingled too cheerfully. I told myself they were insured. I told myself no one would really get hurt. I told myself a lot of things that sound thin when you say them out loud. The title of this post is the truth, though. I can still hear the alarm in my head. Not just the sound, but what it meant, the moment when a thought became an action and there was no rewind button. This isn't a brag, and it's not a sob story either. It's just one chapter of a life I don't always recognize as my own. If you're expecting a mastermind tale, you'll be disappointed. If you're expecting regret, you'll find some. Mostly, this is about how one bad decision doesn't feel big when you make it, but it echoes longer than you think. Preparation sounds so official, like I drew blueprints or had some Ocean's 11 montage playing in the background. Truth is, most of the prep happened in my head, late at night, staring at the ceiling and rehearsing lies I told myself. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to be a thief. It was more like erosion. Small rationalizations piling up. I'll just look. I'll just see if it's possible. I won't actually do anything. Every time I walked past that store, I was really just testing my own pulse, seeing how fast my heart beat when I imagined crossing a line. I paid attention in ways I never had before, not like a professional, more like a nervous animal. Who was usually behind the counter? When the place felt busy versus quiet. I told myself this was just curiosity, the same way people slow down to look at car accidents. But curiosity has a way of turning into intent if you let it sit too long. I also prepared emotionally, which sounds ridiculous but mattered more than anything else. I practiced being calm. Practiced looking like I belong. Practiced not flinching when the bell rang at the door. I even practiced what I'd say if someone asked me a question I wasn't ready for. All of it was about control, or the illusion of it. The night before, I barely slept. Not because I was scared, but because I felt wired, like I'd already done something wrong and my body knew before my brain admitted it. I remember thinking, if I don't do it tomorrow, I never will. That thought felt like permission. Looking back, that was the real preparation, deciding that future me would have to deal with the consequences, whatever they were. Present me just wanted the noise in my head to stop. The morning of it, everything felt sharper. Sounds too loud, colors too bright. I remember tying my shoes twice because my hands wouldn't stop shaking, then laughing at myself like that somehow proved I was fine. I wasn't fine. I was committed, which is different and worse. I chose my clothes carefully, but not cleverly. Neutral, forgettable. The kind of outfit that disappears into a crowd. I kept telling myself that blending in was the same thing as being innocent, like appearances could overwrite intent. I checked my reflection more than usual before leaving, searching for something, maybe guilt written on my face, maybe a last excuse to stay home. I didn't find either. On the walk over, I noticed stupid things. A crack in the sidewalk I'd stepped over 100 times. A guy walking his dog too fast. The smell of coffee drifting out of a cafe. That's the part people don't talk about. The world doesn't pause just because you're about to do something irreversible. Life keeps going, obnoxiously normal. I had rules for myself. Boundaries. Lines I promised I wouldn't cross. I won't hurt anyone. I won't panic. I won't take more than I planned. Those rules made me feel ethical in a twisted way, like I was still in charge of the situation instead of being dragged by it. Right before I reached the store, I stopped and checked my phone for no reason. No messages. No emergencies. Just a blank screen reflecting my face back at me. That was the last moment I could have turned around without anyone ever knowing. I think about that pause a lot. Then the bell on the door rang, and the plan, such as it was, stopped being theoretical. The air inside smelled like metal and polish. The kind of place that feels fragile, even when it's not. My heart kicked hard enough that I was sure someone behind the counter could hear it. That's when I knew, whatever happened next, I was already different than I'd been 5 minutes earlier. I wish I could say it unfolded cleanly, that I moved with confidence, that I felt in control. The truth is messier. My mouth went dry the second I stepped inside, and for a heartbeat I honestly forgot why I was there. The bell's cheerful ring felt mocking, like it knew something I didn't. There was an older man behind the counter. Later I learned he was the owner. At the time, he was just a presence I had to navigate around. He smiled, the polite, tired kind of smile you give someone who's been in retail too long. Asked if he could help me with anything. That question hit harder than I expected. Being acknowledged made everything real. I mumbled something about looking for a gift. Classic, I know. My voice didn't crack, which felt like a victory at the time. I leaned over the glass display, pretending interest while my brain screamed at me to either commit or run. The jewelry sparkled under the lights in a way that felt obscene, so much value sitting out in the open, trusting the world not to take it. Time started doing that weird stretching thing. Seconds felt syrupy, heavy. Every small movement sounded amplified, the slide of a drawer, the shuffle of my shoes, my own breathing. I became painfully aware of how out of place I was, like I'd wandered onto a stage without learning my lines. Then something small went wrong. Nothing dramatic, just enough to throw me off rhythm. Another customer lingered longer than I expected. A question got asked that I wasn't prepared for. My heart started racing, and I remember thinking, this is where people panic and ruin their lives. But instead of backing out, I pushed forward. That's the part that still surprises me. Fear didn't stop me. It narrowed my vision until there was only the next second, and then the one after that. Decisions weren't choices anymore, they were momentum. When it finally happened, when I crossed the point of no return, it felt less like a bold act and more like tripping over a line I'd been staring at too long. The store didn't explode into chaos right away. No alarms yet. No shouting. Just a quiet, terrible certainty settling into my chest. I had done the thing I'd been rehearsing in my head, and now the world had to respond. There's this strange calm right after you do something irreversible. I'd always imagined panic would hit immediately, but instead everything went eerily quiet inside me, like my brain had shut off non-essential functions to survive the moment. I remember nodding along as the owner talked, pretending to listen, my body moving on autopilot while my thoughts lagged a few seconds behind. I was acutely aware of hands, mine, his, the way they hovered near the counter. Every gesture felt suspicious, even the normal ones. I kept thinking I was telegraphing guilt, that anyone could look at me and just know. But no one did. That's one of the most unsettling parts, how normal everything looked from the outside. Then the store reacted. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just a delayed consequence catching up. A sound cut through the air, sharp, mechanical, impossible to ignore. The alarm. Loud, relentless, instantly hostile. It felt like it went straight through my skull instead of my ears. My body jolted before my brain could form a thought. The owner froze for half a second, confusion flashing across his face before recognition set in. His eyes met mine, and that moment, God, that moment, was heavier than anything else. Not anger yet. Not fear. Just shock. Like watching someone you trusted suddenly become a stranger. The other customer reacted too, stepping back, hands raised, saying something I couldn't hear over the noise. The alarm swallowed everything: voices, thoughts, dignity. I remember the owner shouting, but the words didn't matter. Meaning was gone. There was only urgency. I moved without thinking, instincts taking over. I wasn't brave. I wasn't clever. I was just desperate for the sound to stop, for the moment to end. My heart was slamming so hard I thought it might actually knock me unconscious, and part of me almost hoped it would. As I pushed toward the exit, the bell rang again, same cheerful jingle as before, wildly inappropriate now. That sound, paired with the alarm, still lives rent-free in my head. One welcoming, one accusing. Together, they marked the exact second my life split into before and after. I don't remember deciding to run. My legs just did it, like they'd been waiting for permission my brain never formally gave. The door slammed behind me, the alarm still screaming, and suddenly I was outside in daylight, which felt wrong. Crimes are supposed to happen in shadows. Doing this under a blue sky made it feel obscene. People turned to look. Not a crowd, not yet, but enough. A couple on the sidewalk paused mid-conversation. Someone across the street stared a beat too long. I kept my head down, moving fast but not sprinting, because sprinting feels like an admission. Every step felt borrowed, like I was spending time I didn't own anymore. Behind me, I heard the owner's voice spill out onto the sidewalk, strained and urgent. He didn't chase me, not physically, but his presence followed me anyway. You don't need someone grabbing your arm for it to feel like a confrontation. Being seen is enough. I remember cutting down an alley I'd walked past 1,000 times and never noticed. Trash bins. Old flyers peeling off brick walls. The smell of piss and rain. My lungs burned almost immediately, adrenaline turning every breath sharp and shallow. That's when the fear really hit, not abstract, not philosophical. Animal fear. The kind that tastes like metal. I kept expecting a hand on my shoulder. A shout. Sirens. None came, which somehow made it worse. Silence after that much noise felt like a trick, like the universe inhaling before something catastrophic. I ducked behind a dumpster and doubled over, trying not to vomit. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the moment where you find out who you really are. The answer wasn't flattering. What hit me hardest wasn't relief. It was shame. Raw, immediate, and heavier than the fear. I'd imagined feeling clever or powerful if I got away. Instead, I felt small, like a kid who knocked something over and was waiting for the crash to echo back. I stayed crouched there longer than made sense, listening to my own heartbeat try to escape my chest. Every distant sound felt like it could be the start of sirens, cars passing, a door slamming, someone laughing too loudly. I kept replaying the owner's face in my head, that flash of recognition when the alarm went off. That look followed me harder than footsteps ever could. When I finally moved again, it was slow and careful, like I'd forgotten how to exist in public. I stepped back onto the street, trying to look like just another guy who'd taken a wrong turn. That was harder than it sounds. Guilt has weight. It changes how you walk, how you hold your shoulders, how you meet, or don't meet, people's eyes. I half expected someone to stop me. To say, hey, aren't you, but no one did. The city absorbed me without comment. That anonymity was its own kind of confrontation. I'd done something loud and wrong, and the world responded by not caring at all. No cosmic thunderclap. No immediate punishment. Just indifference. I made it back to my apartment and locked the door behind me, sliding down against it like in a bad movie. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there in the dim, breathing, listening for sounds that weren't coming. My phone buzzed at one point, a notification, nothing important, and I almost jumped out of my skin. That's when the justification started creeping in. No one was hurt. They'll file an insurance claim. People do worse things every day. I stacked those thoughts like sandbags, trying to hold back the flood of what I'd done. They helped temporarily. Just enough to keep me from unraveling completely. But beneath all of that was the quiet realization that I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Even if no one ever connected my face to that store, I knew. And knowing turned out to be its own kind of sentence. Adrenaline is a liar. While it's there, it tells you that you're capable, that you're sharp, that you can outrun consequences if you just keep moving. When it leaves, it takes all that confidence with it, and leaves a mess behind. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the alarm again, clean, metallic, endless. My body would jerk like I'd been shocked, heart racing as if I were still mid-run. At some point I realized I was sitting on my bed with my shoes still on, staring at nothing, replaying every second on a loop like I might find a version where it ended differently. Fear showed up in waves. Not the kind that makes you scream or cry, but the quiet, practical kind. What if there were cameras I didn't notice? What if someone followed me? What if tomorrow there's a photo of my face behind the counter? Each thought landed, settled, then made room for the next one. And then there was guilt. That one surprised me with how physical it felt. A pressure in my chest. A heat behind my eyes. I kept seeing the owner's hands on the counter, steady and trusting, and wondering how many times he'd stood there believing people were mostly decent. I hadn't just taken something, I'd violated that assumption. That realization hurt more than I expected. There was also, shamefully, a flicker of thrill buried under everything else. That scared me the most. The fact that some part of me had felt alive in those moments made me question things I didn't want to examine. I hated that part of myself immediately, like discovering a crack in a wall you'd always leaned on. By morning I felt hollowed out. Like something essential had leaked out overnight. I went to work on autopilot, smiling at the right times, answering emails, pretending I hadn't split my life in half the day before. No one noticed. That normalcy felt like a punishment disguised as mercy. The days after were worse than the night itself. At least fear has energy. What followed was this dull, persistent unease, like a low-grade fever of the soul. I kept expecting a knock at the door, my name called out wrong by someone who didn't know me yet but soon would. Every unexpected sound made my stomach drop. I started noticing how often alarms exist in daily life. Car alarms. Store sensors. Even microwaves beeping felt aggressive. Each one sent a jolt through me, like my body had learned a new language and everything was shouting in it. I'd flinch in public and then feel stupid for flinching, which only layered embarrassment on top of everything else. Guilt got more specific as time passed. It stopped being abstract and started attaching itself to details. I'd imagine the owner explaining the incident to his family that night, or filling out paperwork, or standing behind that same counter the next day, pretending he wasn't rattled. I wondered if he trusted people less afterward. I wondered if I'd made the world just a little worse by existing in it that way. I tried to tell myself it would fade. That memory's dull, edges soften. But instead, the story settled in me. Not as something dramatic, but as a reference point. A quiet reminder of what I was capable of when pressure met opportunity. That knowledge was uncomfortable in a way I didn't have words for yet. What really scared me was how quickly life resumed its rhythm. Bills still came. Friends still texted. The sun still came up. I'd expected some internal marker, something to clearly separate who I'd been from who I was now. Instead, I just carried the same face into a slightly heavier future. That's when I realized the crime wasn't over just because I'd left the store. It was still happening, just internally. And I was both the perpetrator and the only witness. Weeks passed. Then months. No police at my door. No awkward call from a number I didn't recognize. The absence of consequences became its own kind of presence, looming, shapeless, impossible to plan around. I'd catch myself listening for footsteps in the hallway long after I should have stopped. I avoided that part of town entirely. Took longer routes. Changed lunch habits. It wasn't strategy so much as superstition, like distance could dilute memory. I told myself I was being careful, But really I was just afraid of seeing the place again, afraid of confirming it still existed without me, unbroken by my little detonation. At some point, I checked local news online, heart pounding like I was 16 and hiding something from my parents. There was a brief mention. Attempted theft at downtown jewelry store, suspect fled. No name. No photo. Just a paragraph swallowed by weather updates and city council nonsense. I stared at it longer than necessary, feeling both exposed and invisible. That's when it hit me, I'd gotten away with it. Or at least I was going to. The realization didn't feel like relief. It felt like being handed something heavy and being told, "This is yours now. Don't drop it." I considered turning myself in more than once. I'd play out the scene in my head, walking into a station, saying the words out loud, letting the story become official instead of private. But every time I imagined it, fear won. Not fear of punishment exactly, but fear of becoming permanently defined by my worst decision. So I stayed quiet. Life continued. And that silence, I learned, can be louder than any alarm if you live with it long enough. Getting away with it didn't reset me back to who I was before. If anything, it split me into two versions of myself that had to share the same body. There was the guy everyone saw, reliable, quiet, mostly decent. And then there was the version of me that knew exactly how easy it had been to cross a line and keep walking. That knowledge changed how I looked at people. Cashiers. Shop owners. Anyone who smiled automatically because their job required trust. I caught myself wondering how often that trust got broken, how often the world just absorbed it and moved on. It made me cynical in a way I didn't like I'd unlocked a door that should have stayed closed. I tried to compensate in small ways. Over-tipping. Being overly polite. Returning extra change even when no one would have noticed. None of it balanced the scale, but I kept trying anyway, like morality was a punch card and I could eventually earn my way back to neutral. Every so often, the memory would ambush me, usually when things were quiet. Lying in bed. Sitting alone on public transit. I'd hear the alarm again, vivid and sharp, and feel my stomach twist like it was all happening in real time. Trauma isn't just for victims, it turns out. Sometimes it sticks to the person who caused it, too. I never told anyone. Not friends. Not partners. I convinced myself it was better that way, that dragging someone else into it would only spread the damage. But keeping it secret came at a cost. It's hard to feel fully known when there's a part of you you're actively hiding. By the time a year passed, the sharp edges had dulled, but they never disappeared. The crime had settled into my identity, not as a headline, but as a quiet footnote I carried everywhere. I wasn't a criminal in the eyes of the law. But I was someone who knew what he'd done, and that knowledge had weight. Years went by. Not all at once, just quietly, the way they do when you're not paying attention. New job. New apartment. New routines. From the outside, my life looked stable, even boring. Inside, that day at the jewelry store had become a fixed point in time, like a scar you stop noticing until it aches for no clear reason. I eventually walked past the store again by accident. Different route, different errand. Same bell on the door. Same faded velvet in the window. My chest tightened so fast I had to stop walking. I didn't go in. I didn't even slow down. I just kept moving, heart hammering, feeling ridiculous and exposed at the same time. What struck me wasn't fear of being recognized. It was the realization that I didn't deserve to be there like a normal customer. That place existed in my head as a crime scene, even if the world had long since cleaned it up and moved on. I'd frozen it in time because part of me needed it to stay broken, as proof that the guilt made sense. I noticed something else, too. I became more cautious in general. Not just about crime, but about choices. I hesitated more. Second-guessed myself. Took fewer risks. It was like that one reckless act had burned through my lifetime supply of impulsiveness, leaving behind someone overly aware of consequences. There were moments I wondered if the owner ever thought about it anymore. If, to him, It was just a bad day filed away with other bad days. That idea was both comforting and painful. Comforting because maybe I hadn't ruined anything permanently. Painful because it meant the weight I carried was entirely mine. By then, I understood something important. Getting away with it hadn't spared me. It had just changed the shape of the punishment. Instead of bars or fines or records, I got memory. And memory, unlike sentences, doesn't have a release date. If you'd asked me before all this what the worst part of committing a crime would be, I would have said getting caught. Jail. Courtrooms. Public shame. All the obvious stuff. What I didn't expect was how much damage could be done in private, with no audience and no verdict. The biggest lesson wasn't, crime doesn't pay. That's too clean, too slogan-y. Sometimes it does pay, at least in the short term. I paid rent. I stayed afloat. The real cost showed up later, in subtler ways: how I slept, how I trusted myself, how I assessed my own character. I learned that you don't need consequences to feel guilty, and you don't need punishment to feel changed. I also learned how thin the line is between someone who would never do that and someone who already has. I used to think morality was fixed, like a personality trait. Turns out it's more like a muscle, neglected, rationalized away, or pushed too far. It can fail when you need it most. That realization scared me more than the alarm ever did. If anyone reading this is flirting with the idea of doing something they know they shouldn't, here's the part one wish someone had told me: the moment doesn't end when you walk away. You carry it. Into quiet rooms. Into otherwise good days. Into versions of yourself you haven't met yet. Even if no one else ever knows, you will. I'm not asking for forgiveness here. I'm not sure that's something strangers can give anyway. This is just me putting the story somewhere outside my own head, finally letting it make noise in a controlled way instead of screaming at me in the dark. 2 parts left after this. The story isn't over yet. It never really is. If I could talk to the guy I was right before the bell rang, the one checking his phone, pretending he still had time, I wouldn't lecture him. I wouldn't threaten him with jail or hell or karma. None of that would have landed. I'd tell him something smaller and harder to ignore. I'd tell him that the relief he's chasing is real, but it's temporary, and it comes bundled with a noise that never fully shuts off. I'd tell him that the confidence he feels right now isn't courage, it's exhaustion wearing a mask. I'd tell him that being desperate doesn't make you evil, but it does make you vulnerable to believing bad ideas are solutions. I'd also tell him that the story he's about to create will outlive the problem he's trying to solve. Bills get paid. Situations change. But the knowledge of what you're capable of, that sticks around. It changes how you argue with yourself, how you justify shortcuts, how you measure regret. You don't come out smarter, you come out heavier. For anyone reading this who feels boxed in by circumstances, here's the practical advice I wish I'd taken. Ask for help before you ask yourself how to get away with something. Pride is expensive. Silence costs interest. There are humiliations that heal, and then there are secrets that don't. I can't undo what I did. I can't repay the trust one broke in a way that would feel proportional. All I can do is refuse to become the kind of person who treats that moment like a win. I don't glamorize it. I don't retell it for laughs. I let it stand as evidence of a bad decision and of a line I won't cross again. One more part after this. The quiet ending. I still hear the alarm sometimes. Not as often as I used to, and not always as a sound. Sometimes it's just a feeling, my chest tightening when I'm tempted to take an easy shortcut, or that split second of hesitation before I make a decision that affects someone else. I've come to see it less as punishment, and more as a warning system that installed itself the hard way. I never went back to being the person I was before that day, but I didn't stay the person I was during it either. Somewhere in between, I learned how to live with the knowledge without letting it define every step. That took time. And honesty, with myself, at least if not with the world. I don't expect redemption points for telling this story. That's not how it works. Some things don't balance out neatly. What I do hope is that putting this here, among other confessions, other imperfect lives, turns it into something useful instead of just heavy. If it stops even one person from convincing themselves they're the exception, then maybe the noise did some good after all. If you're reading this and carrying your own secret, my advice isn't dramatic. Sit with it. Don't romanticize it. Don't let it turn into a story where you're either the hero or the villain. Most of us are just people who made a choice and have to live with the echo. That jewelry store is still there. The world kept going. I did too. But I walk differently now, slower, more deliberate, listening for alarms before they start instead of after they've already gone off.